It's me, Brianka J, and you're welcome. You're visiting my little corner of the internet, and I want to welcome you back. We talk about all things books. So if you're a book lover like myself, make sure to smash that subscribe button. If this is not your first time here, I do welcome you back, unless you're coming to be racist and rude, which the answer is screw off. Anyway, let's get into it. I read Chimamanda Ngozi Adiche's second book, Dream Count, and I took a very deep look at her relationships. The book starts off with her in a pandemic, and she's thinking about all her regrets, and it was so interesting when she got to this relationship between her and this American black man named Darnell. And I had to read it a couple times. I had to sit with it, y'all. I thought about it for months. I had to really sit with it because I'm a black African American woman, and this is a Nigerian migrant woman's perspective, and so that's already going to be different. But I also had to consider some different outlooks that I had never taken before. So it was a growth opportunity for me in terms of thinking about literary theory and the points and the different ideologies that could come up. So I grew from this. But let's get into it, because I'm going to argue today that relationship from between Chia and Darnell is very interesting. Darnell's psychological dominance over Chia extracts her generosity and her emotional labor without explicit demands, mirroring this insidious, non-coercive structures of colonialism. My argument is that though it's not by brute force like historical conquest, there is a subtle extraction economy, right? Darnell benefits from Chia's resources and affections while enforcing a narrative that dehumanizes her, right? Her agency. Much like colonial powers profited from colonial labor while pathologizing the colonized as needy or problematic. The key wrinkle is she chooses to labor, highlighting her inherited hierarchies where the oppressed internalize the oppressed gaze, and she is able to work and labor for him without chains or requests because she thinks that it is labor of love. Let's get into the details, y'all. Let's get into the details. This was deep. This is really deep. So I went through that section a couple times, and the first thing I did was I highlighted every interaction between Darnell and Chia. I highlighted Darnell in pink, highlighted Chia in yellow. What I noticed was when she described Darnell, she used some very negative words, words that showed distance and emotional unavailability and disinterest, right? So she says he barely had to notice her. He was nonchalant. He never tried hard, not eager, silent, non-concerned, re-emerged, bored, irritated, contempt, mockery, detached, singular, habitual, oblivious, acid humor, resentment, complaining, unimpressed, irritated, possessive, controlling, detached, cold, icy, impatient, careless, possessive, childish, rejecting, private, cool, stiff, uncertain, unhopeful, uncontrolling, squashed, disapproving, fussing, and lethal. These are the ways in which she described Darnell. When I read that, I have to say I don't think this is a positive relationship to be in. How she describes him, nothing is good, is really here. But how we look at Chia in that time, we have to go back and go look at how she feels and how she reacts to some of the ways he treats her. And so she has regret, desire, consuming, rushing, wistful, bittersweet, wishing, triumphant, lying, forcing, empty, fearful, failing, desperate, unable, hopeful, imagining, mysterious, deserving, laughing falsely, self-loathing, shredded self-esteem, softening, editing, sobbing, urging, weak, hopeful, clumsy, worried, and uncertain. What we see from Chia in those words is a person who's anxious, a person who is unsure, lacks confidence, lacks self-esteem, lacks self-worth, lacks self-respect. And I mean, when we get into the passages, you'll see that this relationship was one-sided. What we see is we have Darnell. He's grounded in this African American intellectual professor ideology, and at his core, he is a detached, cold, sarcastic, unimpressed, and controlling person. He uses this fake humor and logic as a defense mechanism, but he comes across as an emotionally unavailable person who's never eager, never expressive, and rarely vulnerable. He displays resentment and possessiveness underneath his detachment. Overall, Darnell seems to protect himself by shutting off his warmth and his vulnerability. This masks a deeper fear of losing control, and he maintains power with his emotional distance. So, what do I mean by that? Well, throughout their relationship, Darnell is consistently disappearing. He's always disappearing. So she meets him at a party. He's not interested in dating her, right? She said he was dark and dark-browed. When he spoke, everyone at the table seemed rapt, as if they were sitting at his feet, waiting for crumbs of extraordinary insight fall their way. She said dinner was over and everybody was saying goodbye, but he made no move. Okay. Finally, he asked for my number, not eagerly, but as if he could do with it or without it, and yet I felt triumphant. So even from their first relationship, first interaction, he never really showed a lot of interest, but she felt this like triumphantness just because he noticed her, and he maintained that aloofness throughout their relationship. And I think that aloofness was a part of his way of maintaining their power, I will even go on to say. She said she would send him a message and he wouldn't answer for days, right? Sometimes he replied and sometimes he'd wait like 2 days. And she said it was really shocking. Like, he was just silent, and she would just, it would shock her, and she would think he was not thinking about her. Even when she would say, like, what are we? Why can't you call me? Like, why can't you check on me? And he wouldn't even respond to that. He would just look at her and just say, like, oh my God, you're so ordinary. Like, why would you even ask me that? She said one time he appeared after like a week-long silence and said he was in Alabama. Just like no big deal. When she asked what they were doing, he would be irritated. Like, he just was not really nice to her. At one point, he Googles her father, right? He Googles her father, and he says, Jesus fucking Christ, is that actually his net worth? He's shocked because he doesn't realize how much money Chia has. And she was like, yeah, but I don't think that's real. And then he goes, and he keeps going, and he said, he talked about her family a lot, teasing with this thorniness, right? He would say a real African family, not like yours, as if affluence made Africans impurely African. That's on page 21. Then he goes on to say, Chia's people probably sold my people. She comes from old Igbo money going back centuries. It wasn't just palm fruit they sold to the white folks on that West African coast. He says this in front of all his friends, and it's very uncomfortable. And when she tried to correct him, she says, well, the Biafran War wiped out old Igbo money, so it's all spanking new now. And no one listened to her, and she could tell that he had this resentment, where he had almost a little bit of admiration at the edges, but he was truly resentful, and he tried to use this historical context to make her feel bad. But if you keep looking through it, he does it again in front of Chia's friends, and Chia's friends are African and they are migrants, and so they correct and say, no, that's not true actually. So he makes that joke, and she says, no, that's true. Even slavery has existed throughout human history and all this stuff. And her friend said, no, that's simplistic thinking, because even if that were true, your ancestor was a slave in Igbo land 100 years ago. Nobody would know that today. You would have been absorbed into the family of your enslavers. And then she keeps going, and she continues to correct Darnell. She says, the Europeans and Americans industrialized slavery. They turn people into things like bits of wood. A piece of wood can never be part of your family. A piece of wood can never be human. In Igbo land, a slave was still human. And she even goes into this conversation about her grandfather, who was sold off into almost sold off into slavery, and how her family was very hurt by that action because they did lose his brother in that. And overall, that, you know, she kind of makes the points that African Americans weren't the only people that were hurt in the access of the in the establishment of the transatlantic slave trade, and how they lost and they felt pain about it too, and how sometimes, you know, it was hard for me to go through that because I could have, you know, things to say here about it just in terms of history, but I won't. I'll keep it in context of the work. You know, she says that they hurt too, and I just have to acknowledge that pain, and I won't even try to explain, or that'll be another video, girl, another day. Let's just keep going. But go on to say, you know, this, how he uses this intellectual history to check Chia and keep her in her place, which was what he considered to be beneath him by any means. And so he would say that joke, and it wasn't until Omeligor, you know, challenges him, you know, that he kind of backs out of it. But before that, he felt entirely comfortable to say it, and Chia was too weak, admittedly too weak, to stand up for herself in that way. But that wasn't the only way he kept the power and control. She takes him on a trip, and he says, you know, oh, I don't know about this whole kept boy thing, and you know, and then as they come back, they're in a you know, first class lounge, and everything, but even then, she's like, everything irritated him. Nothing was deserving of praise. He wanted to cancel the boat ride. He didn't want to see the waterfall. He had so much student work to catch up on anyway. Maybe his crabbiness was an act of atonement. It was problematic to like luxurious trips, and now at least he could say he did not enjoy it. Mo, the shriveled up Indian-looking man driving us around on winding roads, pointed him animatedly as he drove. The mother of my wife lives here. This place before all was wild trees. But Darnell just stared out the window and spoke only to say he had an itchy bug bite on his neck. He stayed cold. So even when she gave him a nice trip, he would act unhappy, you know, like he was irritated to be there, and he had better things to do. But then if that were really true, he would not accept the trip. I think what he was trying to do was maintain the control and the power of the relationship. He didn't have the financial control to make Chia bow to him and you know, maintain this. So he had to exert emotional control, and he did that by maintaining a distance and maintaining his a disapproving nature towards Chia, never acknowledging her as doing anything positive. He would consistently, you know, make sure she never felt really pretty, and if someone else said it, he would make it seem as if she was silly to be complimented like in that way, because that should be beneath her, right? That was his way of keeping Chia underfoot. And in turn, Chia played that role because he kept her underfoot, and because she didn't, you know, hold the strength to, or the experiences to, you know, stand up for herself. I really don't understand what drew her to him other than this need to be acknowledged and seen and felt and heard. But aside from that, I couldn't see what the nature of that relationship was, outside of, you know, he created this cycle of, you need to be accepted by me, and her role was to chase that acceptance in hopes that he would present it to her. He never does, right? And it's very similar to the way that in the transatlantic slave trade, you know, you have these people there, you know, you have these colonies and needing resources, needing from Africa, needing and taking and needing. But then when they describe the people of Africa, or they describe the people of the colonies, what they say is, oh, look at these savages, look how much they need us. Without us, they wouldn't know civilization, they wouldn't know God. These people were lost until we came around. Yet you're the one extracting resources. And that is the relationship that I see between Darnell and Chia. Now, what I will say is I am a woman of a certain age, so I can look at that and say, can an event, I really hope she learned something there and doesn't put herself in that position again. But we've been there. As a woman talking to you guys, I'll say, you know, if you find yourself in that type of loop with someone, release yourself. It's never going to work. You're never going to be happy. Just release yourself, because honestly, a person like that really doesn't deserve you, and you know, you don't have to go through these challenges to find that out. You don't have to allow anyone to extract resources from you, because the difference between the colonial trade and what Chia and Darnell did experience is, again, Chia did it willingly, and because we do have rights and we are women, we can choose to not participate in a one-sided relationship at any time. And it wasn't until 3 years that she looked at Darnell and she decided, no more. They go to Paris and he's flirting with the women in front of her and he's rude to her, and when they get back, he berates her for ordering a mimosa, and she's like, what? And then to continue berating her, he locks her out of the bedroom. She sleeps in the living room. The next day she books a flight home, and they never speak again. And that's sad, because if that's a relationship that he cared for, he would have reached out in some way. He would have never treated her like that. So you could see that ultimately the relationship for her may have been built on love, but for him, she was convenient, she was a resource, and he milked it dry. And once he felt like he had his bearings in Paris with his fellowship, he was okay with releasing her and never talking to her again. That was no problem for him. Anyway, guys, tell me what you think of the book. Tell me what you think about their relationship between Darnell and Chia, and I'm going to come back to talk about the relationship between Chia and Chuka and how that is like or different from the relationship between her and Darnell. So we'll get into it. We'll get into the details, the nitty gritty. But let me know what you thought about that section. Let me know what you thought about the entire book. Let's talk about it. Let's get into it. I'll be back.